معنا في هذه الحلقة البروفيسور بالمر. عندما التقينا معه وعرضنا له أوجه الإعجاز العلمي في القرآن والسنة كان يندهش، فقال: هذا كتاب عجيب يصف لنا الماضي ويصف لنا الحاضر ويصف لنا المستقبل. ولكنه كغيره من العلماء يقفون مترددين في أول الأمر، ثم بعد ذلك يعلنون ما يعتقدون. ولقد قدم بحثا في القاهرة حول الإعجاز في مجال علم الجيولوجيا، ثم ختم تصريحه، ختم بحثه هذا بقوله: أنا لا أعلم المستوى الثقافي الذي كان عليه الناس في زمن محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، ولا أدري في أي مستوى علمي كانوا، فإذا كان الأمر كما نعرف عن أحوال الأولين والمستوى العلمي المتواضع الذي ليس فيه هذه الإمكانيات، فلا شك أن هذا العلم الذي نقرأه الآن في القرآن هو نور من العلم الإلهي قد أوحي به إلى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. فهو ذا ينهي بحثه بهذا التصريح.
We need research into the history of early Middle Eastern oral traditions to know whether, in fact, such historical events have been reported. If there is no such record, it strengthens the belief that God transmitted through Muhammad bits of his knowledge that we have only discovered for ourselves in recent times. We look forward to continuing dialogue on the topic of science and the Quran in the context of geology. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so if we start, I'll ask you to say your name so that people will know who it is I'm talking to. So could you tell me your name, please?
My name is Pete Palmer.
And is your alias Alison, open bracket, Pete, close bracket, Palmer?
I was given, the given name was Allison.
Yeah.
But my parents called me Pete from the start.
Right, okay. I wondered why you chose Pete. I thought, is that a name that you chose later, but no.
They chose it because on their honeymoon they met a fisherman, an Italian fisherman named Peter Pipicelli, who they really thought was pretty neat. And after they gave me this family name, the Allison is my father's name and his father's name was involved. They said that's not a name to call a little kid. And no, they didn't like anybody being called Al. And my middle name was already occupied by my mother's brother and by one of my cousins who were in town. So there were too many Ralphies around. So they just said they were going to call me Pete.
Okay. So, right then. Now, you were featured in a video called This Is the Truth, which was a recording of various scientists at various different events. Now, what I'd like to ask you first was, what was your first point of contact in this whole affair?
Well, the very first point of contact was the telephone call I received in January of 1985 from Mustafa Ahmed, who was the North American representative of this group headed by Zindani. And he asked me if I would be willing to answer questions about statements in the Quran that had some scientific implications. And I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. And they said, could we come out to Boulder? He was in Chicago. Could he come out to Boulder and could we do a meet? And so I said yes. And he arrived a few days later, I don't know how long, much later, with a colleague and with intentions of having me answer all this, about 30 questions. And I said, wait a minute, I can't give you honest answers to most of these because these aren't my field. But then we talked and I agreed to try to line up some folks who might help him where I could. And that was where we left that first contact, as I recall.
Yeah, what was one of the people you recommended was Bill Hayes, is that right?
Yeah, I recommended, I had to go, I mean, I didn't tell Mustafa that until I had checked around. I had people I knew I thought might possibly be open
Yeah.
to having a conversation like this. I mean, most of my colleagues wouldn't touch any conversation regarding theology with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
So I knew Peter and I knew Bill, and so I checked with them and said, would they be interested? That sounded kind of fascinating.
Yeah. When they during this phone call, and they were explaining the purpose.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned briefly what they said the purpose was. Can you elaborate on that at all? What they were saying was the purpose of this?
Well, yeah, I don't exactly remember at which one of several early contacts. Probably, when he came out to my office, I wanted to know what the purpose, more about this thing. The purpose, as I understood it, was a periodic evaluation of statements in the Quran to see how we understand those statements today, in that the Quran had to be the Word of God, and therefore they wanted to know exactly what God had in mind, kind of. And that was what I understood we were doing, was to try to clarify how you understood these vague statements that were in the Quran in terms of modern knowledge.
Right, so by periodic then, does that suggest that he was implying that this is something that they do every now and again? They look at the Quran, look at the words, look at what science says, and say, this is what the Quran must mean in that case?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So it was kind of, effectively a retrofitting exercise. Would that be fair to say?
It's perfectly okay. You look in the Old Testament, you get some of these vague statements. So what would we? How would we understand how could they come by these statements? Mm-hmm. Where did they get how did they get this information? How did they get these impressions?
Yeah.
And so we told, I said, well, yeah, I'm sure the springs come out of the ground and the rain, the water cycle. We know a lot more about it now than they did, but they had vague perceptions of these things.
Yeah. Now, during these early contacts, I believe that they invited you to an interview in Jeddah.
Yeah.
And they said that the purpose of this event in Jeddah was the same thing, I presume.
Well, I don't recall what they gave me, what they specifically said about was the purpose, unless I wrote it in that document that I wrote after I got back. But I think they were basically vetting me.
Yeah.
See if I could be a part of this dog and pony show that we ultimately created.
Yeah.
That went around. I think that actually probably succeeded the Cairo meeting. The first meeting was in Cairo, a short time after I was in Jeddah. I don't know, a few months, I guess. I don't know when it was. It was fairly soon after I was in Jeddah. Mm-hmm. I was invited to come back to Cairo, bring my wife, and be a part of this conference. And I think that by then I had the written text of what I was trying to say. And I've got what I have now, my penultimate version. I have a whole bunch of versions without dates on them, so I'm not quite sure when they all came. But the penultimate version, which is shortly before our last contact, is not that much different from what we started with, just a few minor tweaks.
Yeah.
Always, I would approve the text as I read it. Mm-hmm. Just as I would read it, I would clear it with Mustafa and say that he understood, he knew what I was saying, it was okay with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I didn't feel uncomfortable in the text, because in the text I was basically saying we have to establish, that was the point of my text, we have to establish there was no way for this knowledge to have been extant, because almost all the things that I was given, you could understand as being perceptions extant at the time of the writing of the Quran.
Yeah. After your initial contact, the initial contact was January. The Jeddah event, according to the document you sent me, was in August of the same year. And they did an interview with you in front of cameras.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that? And how long did that go on for? Do you recall?
I think I may have written how I went on over parts of more than one day. I think it was a couple of days, but they had a video studio at the university, Abdulaziz University, and in the studio were 3 or 4 of the members of the geology faculty at the university, each of whom had been a student of somebody I knew back in the U.S. And they were there listening to this conversation as I was being videotaped. Oh, nuts. Here comes my phone again.
Yeah, okay. Just carry on and I'll keep recording.
Can you do that?
Yeah, sure.
Listen. Palmer's. No, I'm in the middle of a long-distance Skype conversation. I can't talk. Thank you. I hate this. Money calls. They want, even on a Saturday, they want to go and give you a contribution this, contribute that.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
Okay.
From your notes, it said that when you arrived in August, Zindani reinterpreted the English translations of the Quran in order to make them more geologically accurate. And then you would say in front of the camera what you and Zindani had agreed that this idea might imply.
Yeah.
Yeah, does that sound fair?
I think that's right. Yeah, I don't remember the details of that, but yeah, I mean, I was trying to make sure that what he was getting acceptable.
Yeah.
In terms of what we now knew. So yeah.
Now, according to your notes, this meeting ended with you being asked an unexpected question.
That I don't remember. Did I say that?
How could Muhammad have known?
Oh, well, yeah, they probably asked that, and I said, we have to establish that. We don't know that.
And
I think most cases he would have had to known, but we have to establish there was no way for him to know.
Yeah. And then you also said that Zindani asked to help you to create the draft of a paper summarising the visit, which was going to be presented in I think that was the one you were going to present in Cairo. So Zindani helped you to go through the draft of that paper, did he?
Yeah, we worked that draft back and forth, and I mean it was Zindani and myself, and I think Mustafa was involved.
Yeah.
I think we were co-authors, and as we were listed as co-authors, and we worked that over so that I was comfortable with the text, and they were comfortable with the text, but it was a text that was essentially skeptical.
Yeah. So the purpose of this wasn't really to portray the opinion that this is all miraculous information. And,
no.
And it was supposed to be this is how we can interpret the meanings of these vague words, but we've got to be skeptical about how people would have known this kind of thing.
I mean, there was nothing in the geological stuff that could not have been extant in knowledge in the Middle East. The only part on all the various things we were given that was difficult to understand as being extant knowledge was this embryological stuff.
Yeah.
But the geological stuff, all of that seemed to me was you could kind of fudge it to say that was those experiences were the kind of experiences people would have in the Middle East.
Yeah.
They could be known. There was nothing that precluded that.
And of course, the embryology part wasn't your field of expertise.
But it created an interesting question, because how could you know about microscopic things long before the invention of the microscope? So that was just one of those things. I said, well, there's got to be an answer, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Was this a low-key event?
I don't know. It was the one in Jeddah was low key. The one in Cairo was they had a big audience. It was mostly medical people.
Yeah.
And of course, the big stuff that they were excited about was the embryological stuff. I don't think my stuff made much difference or much impact. But during the time we were there, and I wish I'd written my notes down clearly, I met with, I don't know whether it was the Islamic Brotherhood, some major group. I met with the Secretary General of this group, and I had conversations with him, and I just don't find in my notes his name or anything, but we went to his home and sat around with a dozen people and had a conversation. that was kind of interesting, but I didn't write down many of the details of that for some reason. But it was not. It wasn't directly related to the conference. But it was while we were in Cairo. I had this opportunity to have this meeting and conversation, and I don't know whether it was the Arab League or exactly what. I don't remember what it was called, and I can't find a note that tells me.
Yeah, this is the Cairo meeting, isn't it? That happened then late September to early October. I think
that was
so. Yeah. At the end of the event, you all had a nice time at King Farouk's Weekend Palace, I believe.
I don't remember the palace. I remember that there was some kind of a good dinner banquet. I don't remember where it was. The only palace I remember was in Islamabad when we were in Zia al-Haq's palace and had a lecture. He gave a lecture to the whole group.
Yeah. And
we stayed for dinner, and it was a spectacular, really neat event, to do that. But that was in Islamabad. That was the next conference.
Actually, I remember when I was talking to Bill. I think it was you. He said that he was with when you noticed that there were no women present at the meal or something. Is that?
Yeah, and well, what was interesting, there was one woman that we talked to who was the sort of, I don't know what, vice president for education in Pakistan or something, well up high in the government. But it was a woman, and she and my wife got talking, and we found out that she was very uncomfortable about coming to this meeting because it was all the men. She felt uncomfortable about it. And we found that was kind of interesting, that she didn't, even though she was very high up in the government, she felt uncomfortable being in the conference. I think the women were there because at the Zia al-Haq dinner, there were the wives of myself and Peter Hildebrand and this lady. They had a separate table in the dining area in Zia al-Haq's palace.
Yeah.
But she said, the woman said she was pretty uncomfortable being included in a sense because it was somehow not Muslim, right?
Now, there was a...
the wife just...
That's fine.
Hold just up. What's up? Okay.
Do you need to end early and do this another time, or?
What's that?
Do you need to end this early and do it another time? No, okay. Now, this affair in Cairo, I believe it ended with a bit of a furore when you made a suggestion about the implications of Muhammad's illiteracy.
No, that was us, Islamabad. That wasn't Cairo.
Was it Islamabad?
Yeah.
And that was after Cairo, was it?
That was after Cairo. Exactly when, I don't know whatever dates they were, we went to Islamabad, and that was the conference where I responded to a couple of Egyptians who, when I suggested that we have to know that there was no way for Muhammad to have been involved in this, and they stood up and challenged me and said, well, but Muhammad was illiterate. And I said, there's a difference between being illiterate and being stupid. And I think he was probably a very brilliant man, and that got me in trouble, rescued partly by a jet black Somali Supreme Court judge who was trained in England, had perfect Oxford English, who stood up in the audience and said, he's right. We have to know that there was no way for this knowledge to have been extant in Muhammad's time. So the audience that was a big audience. That was several hundred people there, a couple hundred people at least. And most of them were just hanging on these words about the embryology. And my stuff was pretty much peripheral because I didn't have anything that they really could hang a case on. Yeah.
Now, at the end of these events, Indani created this video collection called "This Is the Truth," which, in summary, is supposed to be a large collection of Western scientists that had studied the Quran and all come to the conclusion that either that they thought it was from some divine origin, or that they were absolutely dumbfounded as to an explanation, but weren't quite prepared to make that leap. In your case, what he says, I had someone translate it for me. It says, I don't know the cultural level which the people at the time of Muhammad, peace
I
be
got that quote here. Yeah. So, yeah. That I don't. That quote. Yeah, I got that here. I know the cultural.
just
Is
before,
that
just
me? A quote from me?
yeah, just before you reply to that, can I just read it out for the sake of the recording, so that,
Sure.
yeah, so that people know what you're responding to. It says that you don't know what level the people were on at the time, but if the position is, and we don't know, basically that these people couldn't have known these things. It goes on to say, there is no doubt that this knowledge which we read now in the Quran is light from the divine knowledge that has been revealed to Muhammad.
That's not me. Not me. I never would have said that.
So at no point did you suggest that there would be no doubt that this information in the Quran is from a divine origin?
Oh no, because I was a total. I mean, I totally didn't believe that was. There were rational explanations for everything.
Yeah.
Just understand how we explained a couple of them, but that didn't mean that was therefore divine knowledge. I think we had to be sure there was not an explanation, and the one mystery was the embryonic stuff, and I found an explanation that satisfied me anyhow. But that was long after we'd finished.
Yeah, yeah. I thought this part of the video was a bit suspicious, because if you had said that there's no doubt that this is information from a divine origin, that they would have said, look what he said next, and then put the video footage on of you saying those words. But effectively, the most juicy part of what you were alleged to have said wasn't shown, and Zindani simply presented, oh, by the way, after that, he went on to tell me that he thought all of this was probably from God. So I always thought that bit was a little bit suspicious, just to say the least.
I never, to my knowledge, believed that this had a divine origin. It had a rational human origin.
Another thing that I actually remember reading from that script is that you were apparently astonished by the accuracy of the information in the Quran, and you said, "What is this wonderful book?"
Doesn't sound like me at all.
I believe that the information that he asked you to look at was something about the lowest point.
Yeah, I mean that was in the first interview in Jeddah.
Yeah,
where they had this, because I had brought my globe with me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm familiar with this globe. It's a really neat globe. It was put out by the National Geographic probably 40 years or more ago. But they had this statement, and they were right there printed on the globe was lowest point on Earth. And so I said, that's kind of neat that that the Quran mentions that, but it doesn't prove anything particularly, because they just happen to be in the right area.
Yeah. I mean, what would you describe? How would you explain that information being within the possibility of human knowledge at the time? Is that something that you would be able to see? You would be able to look around and say, this looks like it's the lowest place in the region?
I mean, if the people of that time, I think, yeah, that was probably known that was the lowest point in their world.
Mm-hmm.
Just happened that the Quran had it right, but it wasn't, because it was a bit of divine knowledge. That was merely the Middle Eastern State of the Union.
Mm-hmm. It was possible that it was known locally as the lowest place.
Yeah, sure.
And I seem to remember we discussed this before, and you said something about it's possible to see that it's the lowest place because it would be the only place where you can see that you're lower than sea level or something. Does that sound familiar?
I don't recall saying it quite like that, because I wouldn't know. I probably didn't think about how would they measure, except because they would have to have some way of getting some crude measurement that said this was lower than the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's all. They just figured that they had some sense of elevations by then. Maybe the Romans had done that.
Yeah.
So they had that knowledge, but I didn't. I never was I thought it was just kind of neat that they had it as the lowest point, and that's what the Globe showed it. But that didn't mean anything else.
I mean, really, this is basically the end of my prepared questions.
Okay.
So there's a few questions that I'll ask which are a bit silly, but I have to ask these because of the kind of responses I've had to my other interviews.
Okay.
So the first one, did you become a Muslim?
No.
Okay. Have you been paid by me or anybody else in order to participate in the interview that we are having now?
No, not a bit.
Have you been intimidated by anyone to retract your original statements?
No. I mean, I'm thinking that my original statements, as you've got them, may not be quite accurate, but I haven't been intimidated by anybody.
Are you are you in fact an imposter?
What do you mean by that?
I don't know. I suppose could you possibly be an actor with a latex mask on?
No, I did all that stuff.
I had to ask you that one because I have actually been asked, how do I know this isn't an actor with a latex mask on?
Sure, I mean that's fair enough, but I don't know how you could prove it's not.
Well, you could pull at your face or something.
Yeah.
No, I don't think we'll go down that route. Now, what struck me with this whole series of events was that different scientists went to different venues at different times, and they all seem to have had different experiences. In Bill Hayes' case, he was told that he was trying to help the Mullahs feel more comfortable about science and to convince them that their religion said that they should really be embracing science. Alfred Kroner said that the meeting he went to had nothing to do with religion whatsoever. It was just a geology meeting, and then they sprung some cameras on them and asked them lots of leading questions. In your case, it seems to be probably the very initial point of contact, where they were saying that they're reviewing the meanings of the Quran to make sure that they've got them correct, that they're matching them up to what science says now. Because you did a kind of a pre-written talk, a prepared talk, it's obviously not been so easy to quote mine you, and you haven't actually had any people write to you and ask, do you believe that the Quran is from God? Is that right?
No, never.
Your experience is really in contrast to other people, because Alfred, for example, said that he's had hundreds of people write to him, and he had a pre-written copy-paste response. It'd say, "Dear XXX," and then the explanation. Bill said that he had quite a number of people, because Bill was obviously, quote mine, saying, "I think it must be from the divine being." So obviously these other people have been quote mine. So my purpose really in talking to you was, because you seem to have been the initial person that they contacted, I was really kind of interested in the origins of this affair, what they originally said it was for, how other people got involved, and so on. It's been really interesting having you explain that to me. It's been really interesting hearing about your experience of when you flew out, and it seems that you've been flown out to various places on quite a number of occasions as well.
Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, it was it's way to go. First class return air flight from Denver to Islamabad.
Yeah.
Don't mind that a bit. It's a long flight. I think the only meeting that Bill Hay was at was the Islamabad meeting. I don't think he was at any others.
I think he said I don't really recall.
There was one I missed. It was in Moscow or somewhere in Russia that I was not able to get to.
I've never heard of a Moscow one.
There was one after. There was somewhere in between. I had a conflict, just couldn't go to it. But it was. I'm pretty sure it was somewhere in maybe just in the Soviet Union. May have been in the Islamic part. I don't remember where it was. It could have been in Kazakhstan or Tashkent or something like that. But I didn't go to that. So, and I don't seem to have the correspondence about that in my folder.
Yeah.
But, and Bill might have been there.
Yeah, he didn't mention Moscow. I haven't heard of that. I think he definitely mentioned Islamabad and mentioned long boat trips and things. And I don't really recall. I was under the impression, I thought he went to Jeddah as well, but I'm probably mistaken.
He might have gone after me, because at the time I went to Jeddah, they didn't have those contacts. I hadn't made those contacts.
Yeah. Okay.
Or at least maybe I'd made them, but I didn't. We didn't go at the same time if he went.
In a summary, do you think that it would be fair to say that your opinion on this entire matter seems to have been misrepresented?
Well, as you present it to me,
yeah,
it seems like in some cases I've been misrepresented. Fortunately, I have the text of what I read in all those meetings, and I didn't deviate. I didn't deviate from that text in my presentation, and in the question answers, I didn't get. I always said, we have to establish that there was no way for this knowledge to have been extant at that time.
And do you in any way endorse the proposition that the Quran could only have come about through some supernatural origin?
No, of course not.
Right. Okay. And finally, just for to cover myself legally, do you give me permission to make the contents of this video recording public?
Yeah, I kind of would like to see it.
Yeah.
But you're going to make it public before you do it.
Well, what I'll do is it's going to be uploaded in its entirety unedited. So it's going to include people phoning you up to ask you about financial matters and things. It'll all be there because I literally want it to remain 100% uncut. Because the name of the channel on YouTube is This Is The Truth, Uncut. So I can't really edit out the phone call because then it'll be cut. So what I'll do is I'll upload it and I'll let you have a look at it first. And if you're not happy with it and you want me to get rid of it, that's fine. And if you're happy with it, then I'll make it public.
Okay. I mean, I enjoyed my contacts with everybody involved.
Yeah.
In this, I wasn't vehemently trying to contradict them. But I was just saying that from my point of view, we have to have conclusive evidence that there is no way for this to have been extant knowledge.
Yeah.
And we didn't change that. We had a lot of private conversations along these lines without. I mean, we just kind of agreed to disagree. And I think in the New York Times piece, which Dan Golden wrote, Sindani is quoted as saying I was the one who wouldn't commit.
Right. There you are. That was accurate then.
That was accurate.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing is though, it wasn't entirely accurate because I haven't actually yet spoken to a scientist that did commit. I've spoken to about 5 or 6 on the phone. You're only the 3rd video interview I've done so far. And so far, every single one of them said that just wasn't my opinion at all. So it would seem that you weren't the only one that wouldn't commit. Maybe what he really meant was the others were much easier to make it look like they'd committed.
They may have been. They were more tactful. I don't know.
Yeah, they were a bit more polite, I think, maybe. Right. Okay.
We had very frank conversations. I mean, because I don't mind discussing theology with theologians. I think I enjoy that.
Yeah.
And so we had discussions about where I came from and why I thought the way I thought, and that was okay. So I never felt I was being sort of argued with or had my arm twisted or anything like that.
No, doesn't sound like you were. But as long as people realise that if someone uses you as an authority on the information in the Quran regarding geology, and that you as this authority say you've really got to be impressed by this. You should be quite convinced that this is beyond the ability of a 7th century human, that they know that this isn't something that they should be listening to.
No, I never implied that at any point.
That's brilliant. Right, okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Pete, who's hasn't got the name Pete in his real name anywhere. Pete Palmer, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay.
Thank you.